Andrea Stella has just confronted the FIA with one of his strongest public reactions yet after new inspection findings from Las Vegas revealed microscopic plank violations that he believes have pushed McLaren into a ruling so severe that it resembles sabotage in its impact. The FIA recorded the skid blocks on both McLaren cars below the legal 9mm limit, with Piastri reaching 8.74mm and Norris dropping to 8.88mm, and these values were confirmed through repeated measurements precise to 1,000th of a millimeter. When Stella realized that the FIA dismissed every contributing factor from disrupted practice data to unexpected chassis compression, he demanded clarity on why such rigid interpretation was used when the drivers had delivered flawless races and the violation came from microscopic engineering load. And before I show you exactly how Stella challenged the decision, make sure you subscribe right now, because the fallout from this Las Vegas disqualification is escalating fast and the next revelations will shake the 2025 championship. The turning point for McLaren arrived the moment the FIA released its full post-race inspection results from the Las Vegas Grand Prix. The document confirmed that both Norris and Piastri had failed the mandatory 9mm plank regulation, revealing numbers so precise and so consistent that there was no path for appeal. The inspectors recorded the underside of Piastri's car at 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90mm, values measured with instrumentation accurate to 1,000th of a millimeter. These numbers were repeated several times without deviation, establishing an indisputable violation. In that moment the team understood that their weekend was about to be rewritten. Tension inside the garage escalated further when the FIA presented the data from Norris's car. His plank measured 8.88 and 8.93mm, readings that again remained unchanged across each repetition of the inspection. The nearly identical illegal values across both cars made it impossible to link the infringement to an isolated racing moment. Instead, the pattern suggested a systemic issue rooted in the setup applied before the race. This realization struck McLaren's staff with significant force because it indicated that the failure had been embedded in the very foundation of the cars long before the drivers reached the grid. For Norris and Piastri, the situation was emotionally difficult to process. Both drivers had completed disciplined and controlled races, managing tire behavior across cold night temperatures and navigating the high-speed demands of the Las Vegas layout with precision. They avoided heavy impacts, kept their cars within predictable limits, and executed the strategic plan exactly as required. Yet none of those efforts played any role in the legality of the car. The FIA reminded the team that the plank rule does not consider context or driver performance. It evaluates a number. If that number falls below 9mm, the car is illegal. The drivers were therefore penalized not for errors they made but for technical conditions entirely outside their control. The championship consequences of the ruling became clear when the FIA recalculated the standings. Norris lost 20 points from his podium finish, dropping him to 390 points instead of consolidating his position in the title fight. Piastri lost his own points haul and fell back to 366 points, placing him level with Verstappen. In an instant, the competitive landscape of the season shifted. What McLaren believed could be a decisive moment in their favor instead became a race that strengthened their rivals. This reversal did not merely affect the scoreboard. It reshaped belief inside the team about where responsibility for the collapse truly lived. As the engineers attempted to explain the technical origins of the failure, they highlighted the lack of full practice data due to repeated interruptions earlier in the weekend. Without complete long runs, the team had been unable to establish reliable information about how the car compressed under maximum aerodynamic load. They emphasized that the combination of limited data, cold track temperatures and high fuel conditions created a situation where plank wear could exceed predictions. However, the FIA made it clear that none of these factors influenced the legal evaluation. The rule is absolute and relies solely on the final measured thickness of the plank. The moment that triggered the strongest reaction from Stella, Norris, and Piastri came when they realized that the FIA dismissed every contextual factor that contributed to the violation. The document treated the plank rule with strict mathematical interpretation, independent of the difficulties McLaren faced in preparation. Seeing identical readings across both cars, the drivers understood that the breach came from a structural engineering misjudgment, not an event on track. This is what made the ruling feel so severe and so personal. It was not the competitors who defeated them. It was the microscopic measurement beneath their own car that erased their race. The core problem behind the Las Vegas disqualification emerged clearly when the FIA delivered the official measurement sheet to McLaren and confirmed that both cars breached the 9mm plank regulation. Norris's plank had fallen to 8.88 and 8.93mm, values measured with instruments capable of detecting variations as fine as 1,000th of a millimeter. These readings were repeated several times and remained completely consistent, leaving no margin for interpretation or doubt. Stella saw immediately that the panel applied the rule with mathematical rigidity, reducing the entire case to a pair of microscopic numbers. The situation escalated when the team examined the measurements from Piastri's car and discovered nearly identical values. His plank recorded 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90 millimeters. The symmetry between the two cars proved that the issue did not come from driver behavior or a random event on track. Instead, it pointed toward a setup characteristic embedded in the car itself. For Stella, this symmetry explained why the drivers were furious and why the team believed the FIA had overlooked context. The violation came from an internal engineering detail, not from reckless driving or avoidable error. Norris and Piastri had completed the race with discipline and precision. They managed the cold track temperature, protected the tires across long high-speed sections, and avoided severe impacts or deep curb strikes. Their performance reflected calm judgment rather than excess aggression. Yet the FIA applied the rule without acknowledging that nothing in the driver's behavior indicated irregular floor usage. To Stella, this distinction mattered because it showed that the drivers had upheld their responsibilities. The breach occurred not in their inputs but in a physical component beneath the car, and the stewards chose to ignore every factor aside from the microscopic final measurement. This rigid interpretation of the regulation became the source of Stella's frustration. The FIA's document states plainly that the governing body only considers the remaining plank thickness at the end of the race and does not weigh preparation limitations, environmental conditions, or the predictability of chassis compression. Stella believed this approach dismissed the reality of a weekend shaped by significant practice disruptions that prevented McLaren from gathering essential long-run data. Without that data, the team had made a calculated assumption that normally would have been validated through track time. In Las Vegas, that validation never occurred, yet the FIA treated the absence of data as irrelevant. The championship consequences made the situation even more severe. Norris lost 20 points from his result and fell to 390 points, while Piastri lost his full points total and dropped to 366. Verstappen benefited from the exclusion and matched Piastri's total. Stella saw how the single technical breach had rewritten the title fight in one stroke. From his perspective, the FIA had imposed one of the harshest penalties in the rulebook without acknowledging the exceptional conditions that produced the microscopic breach. This was not a minor shift in the standings. It was a fundamental reset of momentum at a decisive moment of the season. The final element that pushed Stella to challenge the FIA was the near-perfect alignment of plank wear between both cars. It revealed that the breach stemmed from the team's attempt to optimize performance through an aggressive setup that normally would have been corrected with reliable practice data. Stella understood the responsibility but rejected the idea that a measurement differing from the legal limit by fractions of a millimeter justified erasing the entire race. To him, the ruling ignored intent, circumstance, and context. It relied solely on the number. This is why Stella confronted the decision. The scale of the punishment felt disproportionate to the cause, and the impact felt indistinguishable from sabotage even though no intention existed. The engineering pressure inside McLaren reached its highest point once the team compared the FIA measurements with the ride height model they had prepared before the race. The numbers did not lie. Norris's plank reaching 8.88 millimeters and Piastri's falling to 8.74 revealed that the floor had operated below legal tolerance for the entire race distance. These were not the kinds of deviations caused by isolated on-track aggression or unexpected curb strikes. They reflected a predictable pattern created by a setup built too close to the minimum limit. Stella recognized immediately that this was a structural oversight, but he believed the FIA's ruling failed to recognize how the weekend conditions contributed to the outcome. As the team reviewed the weekend data, it became clear how much the disrupted practice sessions had damaged their preparation. Several early runs were cut short due to track surface issues, meaning the engineers never obtained the long-run information needed to measure full fuel compression and plank behavior under sustained load. Without those laps, the engineers were forced to estimate the safe ride height for the race. In Formula One, estimation is not an act of negligence. It is a necessity when conditions prevent validation. Stella believed that context mattered because the team never had the opportunity to confirm their modeling. However, the FIA treated the absence of data as irrelevant. The final measurement alone defined legality. The cold Las Vegas night added another dimension to the problem. As temperatures dropped, tire pressures reduced, lowering the effective ride height of both cars and increasing the frequency of plank contact with the track surface. Over a race distance, even slight changes in pressure can produce microscopic wear at the reference points. Stella argued that this condition should have been considered because the circuit's temperature shift was more dramatic than forecast. The FIA acknowledged the temperature data in its report but dismissed it as non-influential in the legal analysis. For Stella, this reinforced the belief that crucial context had been ignored in favor of rigid numeric interpretation. The team also considered whether isolated impacts could have accelerated the wear, but the identical readings across both cars removed that possibility entirely. If one car had suffered a unique incident, its measurements would have shown uneven patterns. Instead, both cars displayed uniform erosion at nearly identical values. This symmetry confirmed that the violation originated from a single pre-race setup philosophy rather than any unpredictable race event. Stella accepted that the team had been aggressive in its pursuit of performance, but he challenged the idea that such a microscopic miscalculation deserved the harshest penalty available in the rulebook.